It's a little after 4 o'clock on Tisha B'Av. 4 o'clock is a very, very important time. It is, in a sense, a switch that we switch. What happens at 4 o'clock? 4 o'clock is the time that we're told Mashiach was born. What does that mean? The difficult time, this time of year, is from Rosh Chodesh Av to Tisha B'Av. That's 9 days, as we know. 24 hours a day is 216 hours. We're told Mashiach was born 4 hours before that time, which Sha'ot Zemaniot is approximately 4 p.m., after 212 hours. That is the time that, in what I follow, we start sitting high again. Some people do it right after Hasot. But I have the custom of sitting low till 4 p.m. It is the time when, according to the custom that I follow, the women go out and make purchases, not shoes and handbags. No. We say for women, it's a very, very hard time. And we want to give them a sense Mashiach is coming. And this is the time after he's born. They go out, they buy groceries that can last, like rice and flour and oil. I know my beloved late wife, Rabbanit Ruth Aleyha Shalom, she would cry her eyes out on Tisha B'Av at night. She would feel the pain to the core of her soul. And the same in the morning. And at 4 o'clock, she would get up. She would take some of her daughters and she would diligently go and do what all the ladies in our heritage have been doing from before that, all those years ago. It's a time, in fact, from earlier in the day, even in Eretz Israel, they have the custom in the Sephardi homes that the women start cleaning out the house in preparation for Mashiach. This is wonderful, but I see a problem. We talk so much about Mashiach. We talk so much that he's coming. We talk so much about the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, the third Bayit, the third one. But there's a few things that sound a little troubling. We read in Echa, we sat on the floor, we cried last night and this morning. We read, speaking about Yerushalayim, about Sion, about Zion, En lah menachem, En lah menachem. What does that mean? That means there is no comfort for her. What does that seem to mean? When something goes wrong, how do you comfort a person? You go to them and you say, it's terrible, we feel bad, we feel the pain. But don't worry, in the future it's going to be okay. Things are going to turn around. Everything in life is temporary. Don't worry. The Nabi is saying, no, en lah menahem. There is no comfort for her. As if that's not enough, the prophet Haggai, speaking about the construction of the Beit HaMikdash, the second one, we're talking about number 2 now, the second one, not the third, the second. He says, Gadol yeh kebod habayit hazeh ha'aharon. The honor of this temple, the second temple, number 2, the last one, is greater. The honor of this last temple is greater than the first. And who says? Amar Hashem Sebaot. The Lord of hosts. God himself says that. That's what Haggai tells us. What does this mean? Does it mean temple is not going to be rebuilt? The last one was the second one? Does it mean Mashiach is not going to come? I want to tell you a story about Rabbeinu the Hidah, the holy Hidah, Hacham Hayim Yosef David Azulai. Hidah is an acronym for his name. As we know, he traveled around the world, and we owe the Hidah not only the great works that he gave us, and there's an enormous amount of works, but both the Ashkenazi and Sephardi worlds owe him that in his travels he saw manuscripts, he saw writings, and he signed on them, I, the Hidah, approve of this. And because of that, many works are accepted and learned today, because of Rabbeinu the Hida. 1 year on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, Rabbeinu the Hida was in Constantinople. Today it's Istanbul. 1923 they changed it, the Ottoman Empire. Constantinople. He lived 200-something years ago, so it was Constantinople. And on Tisha B'Av, a little after Hasot Hayom, a little after midday, he sees the women happily, joyfully cleaning out their houses and painting them. Painting their houses. Wait a minute, from Rosh Chodesh Av, we're not allowed to paint. On Tisha B'Av itself, they're painting their houses. He was shocked. He called everybody to the Beit Knesset, and he got up and he said, you have to forbid this custom. It's Tisha B'Av. It's still a fast. They cannot do this. A little later, Rabbeinu the Hida is walking on the street, and he sees two women talking, and they're pointing at him. And he hears them say, this is the rabbi who said Mashiach is no longer coming. The Hida started shaking. He went up to them and said, who said that to you in my name? They said, you did. You said we're not allowed to prepare our homes for the coming of Mashiach. He said, if he was me, he would have said, whoa. Don't know what he said exactly. He says, I want everybody back in the Beit Knesset. He got the whole community, or as many as he could, back into the synagogue, and he spoke to them. He said, this that I said to you this morning was a mistake of mine. He said to the husbands, go home, tell your wives to clean the homes, and they can paint them twice. Tell them that Mashiach is surely coming. Say this is probably the basic concept of the minhag that we have of doing different things for the coming of Mashiach that the women do on the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, around this time. That still leaves us with the question of En lah menahem, that she doesn't have any comfort. It also leaves us with the question of Haggai, calling it the last Beit, the last Beit HaMikdash. Before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about why we're here and what it is we should be doing. The Holy Pele Yoes says that the destruction, the Horban Beit HaMikdash, the destruction of the temple must be, as he says, a remembrance before our eyes. I mean, after all, we say, Im ishkachech Yerushalayim, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, tishkach yemini. What it means is we cannot forget Jerusalem. We cannot forget Yerushalayim. We cannot forget the fact that the Beit HaMikdash is not here and it's not been rebuilt. So, how do we do that? So one thing he says is we must be very particular that when we eat, when we have a meal, the Birkat HaMazon, we must be cognizant of the fact that our table, when we're here down on earth, we're eating all the beautiful foods we like. Not today, but meat, wine, all kinds of maybe cookies and sweet things afterwards. All the beautiful foods on the table that we're eating, but the table of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our merciful Father in heaven, has been empty for the past 2,000 years. He also says that people should be very particular about saying Tikkun Hasot, which is the crying over the Horban, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, every night after midnight. How many people do you know that do it? Nobody does it anymore. A handful of people do it. It's not on our minds. Let's be honest, it's not on our minds. So he says, especially on Shabbat, when we sit at the Shabbat table, we must remember the Horban. Now that sounds strange, doesn't it? Shabbat is the day we don't want to think of sad things. We're commanded, don't think of sad things. You're going to make you cry, get you upset. It's Shabbat. Shabbat's happy. He says, especially on Shabbat, you must remember it. But you know what? Do we even think about what we say on Shabbat in the Birkat HaMazon? In the Resei that is only for Shabbat, the portion that is only for Shabbat, we say, V'cham she'achalnu v'shatinu, and even though we have sat here and eaten all these delicacies from meat to wine and candies and everything else, Horban Beitcha Gadol v'Kadosh lo shachachnu, the destruction of your holy and great house we have not forgotten. But we have forgotten. We don't even think about that when we say it. We probably didn't even realize we're saying that. Probably all these years we've been saying Birkat HaMazon, we don't really realize it's even in there. We shouldn't say it too loudly. We don't want to remind HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Problem is he knows. That's the difficulty. I was speaking to my son, Rabbi Menashe, the other day. I was talking to him about this concept about how on Shabbat we have to remember the destruction, the sad moment in our lives of the Beit HaMikdash. And he said, I've thought about this in the past. I said, tell me. He said, I have a thought. It's my own thought. I said, what is it? He said, why is it that we only say it on Shabbat and not during the week? He said, during the week we're not permitted to have a complete table. We can't eat everything. We have to have something missing. He said, but on Shabbat we can have whatever it is we want. And that is when we're most likely to forget HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's when we have our Hachamim put in the Birkat HaMazon, the Reseh, to remind us about the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. We must remember the basic concept that when we forget, God remembers. When we remember, God forgets. So we have to keep remembering the Beit HaMikdash, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. We have to keep remembering why it is, what we did that brought it about, so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will forget and bring us the next Beit HaMikdash. One of my daughters was saying to me today, she was saying, wasn't part of my original plan to mention this, but I liked it so much. She says, who are the people who have to bring about Mashiach and the next Beit HaMikdash? It's very easy for us to go around and say, how's it going to happen? You see all these people, they're sitting outside, they're not keeping Shabbat, they're not this, they're not that, the other. She says, no. She says, it's the ones who God expects to do the right thing. They're the ones who have to do better. In other words, you and me. I don't even know if I can even include myself in that level. But definitely you're on the level where God expects of you, because he says you've reached a certain level, that you have to be that much more particular about everything you do. And that's what's required of us. Because, let's face it, we're not patting ourselves on the back. The Jewish people are amazing people. It's just that we're failing still in certain areas, but we are amazing people. You know, we've been counting for almost 2,000 years. To me, this is mind-boggling. 2,000 years, there is a people that are still counting every year. Today is 1 year, today is 1,000 years, today is 1,500 years, today is 1,948 years since we lost the Beit HaMikdash. After 2,000 years, they're still sitting down and crying on the floor and counting the years of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. This is uncanny. I don't know any other religion or people that would do this. I'm not talking about counting in order to know what year it is. We don't count our years from that. We count the years from the creation of the world. That's a whole different matter. We are counting how long it's been since we've been without the Beit HaMikdash. We haven't forgotten. We have to remember more. That's the point. That's the point. We're at that level where we are a people who do remember, but we forget when we shouldn't forget, like at Birkat HaMazon. When things are going well, when we're celebrating and happy. Moreno Rabbeinu Acham Yosef Hayim Alav Shalom, the holy Ben Ish Hai, writes in Birkat Hayim. He says, Habayit hazeh asher ata boneh. Speaking to Shlomo HaMelech alav shalom, King Solomon. This house, meaning the first Beit HaMikdash that you are building, Im telech behukotai, if you go in accordance with my statutes, ve'et mishpatai ta'aseh, and you do my sentences, we say my judgments, lalechet bahem, to go in accordance with them, v'hakimothi et debari etach, then I will establish my word with you, asher debarti el David abicha, that I spoke to David your father, David HaMelech alav shalom. And then, v'shachanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, and I will dwell among the Jewish people, v'lo e'ezov et ami Yisrael, and I will not leave my people Israel. So, 1 minute, what's happening here? We're going to God and asking Him to build the Beit HaMikdash. But He's not doing it yet. Why? What is He thinking? What's going through His mind? The answer is exactly what we've just said. And I'm going to explain it by way of a story that Chacham Yisrael tells, but I'm going to paraphrase it. Two friends. There are two friends. Each of them inherited a large amount of money, large sums of money. Now, one day they had to go together to a corporation, and they were in awe when they saw the building that one person owned. They went in this parking lot, huge parking lots. They parked their car. They walked for a distance because there were a lot of spaces for cars, and they walked past greens and trees and shrubs. This is all owned by one man. And then they found fountains, and they walked past the fountains. And then there's this huge long awning which they walked down, which took them to the entrance of the building. They walk in the building, and it's all marble. And they had to walk for quite a distance till they came to the reception desk with several receptionists dealing with all the people who were coming there on business matters. And then they were ushered up to the offices that they had to go to, and they went there, and they were in even more awe. The computers, banks of computers lining the upstairs from wall to wall. They saw an amazing cafeteria with unbelievable food. There was a gym room. There was everything. When they left, they said, that's what we want to do. Each one said, I want to have this building. The other one says, I'm also going to have this building with my inheritance. So what did they do? Well, one of them started right away. He contracted with some construction people, and he said, this is the building I want. These are the fountains I want. These are the parking lots I want. This is the shrubbery and the greenery that I want. And they made up a contract, and they started working. They started working. Unfortunately, when they were about 2/3 of the way done, he ran out of money. So he said, no money, we're not continuing. He had a dug-up parking lot, not paved yet. He had all mud where there was going to be green. There were just like dug-up troughs in the earth where they were going to put fountains. The building was incomplete. Inside there was nothing there. There were no desks. There were no walls in most of the places, just the outer walls. He didn't know what to do. His friend, on the other hand, did not build a building. He said, what I'm going to do is, I am going to take some of the money that my father left me, and I'm going to buy some merchandise, and I'm going to work out of my basement. And he had a small basement. And he had to ask his wife's permission. You can't start business in your basement without asking your wife's permission. She's a good wife. She said, of course. So there he is. He's working out of the basement. Initially, he's losing a little money. He doesn't know what to do, but he gets the hang of things and starts making money. Gets better and better. Then he finds he needs help. He can't do it on his own. He needs someone to work with him. He gets another guy to be his assistant, and they both sit in his basement. Small basement, but there's enough room for them. Bit by bit, the business is getting better and better, till finally they need more employees. Now, they can't fit in the basement. He's definitely not going to ask his wife for the living room. He knows, his boundaries. So they go out, and they rent space in an office building. And everyone's working hard, and the business is growing. It's growing and growing, till finally he says, we need so many people, we have to have our own building. So he contracts with somebody, and they build a building with some of the money that he inherited and some of the money that he made in profits in the business, till eventually they put up this gorgeous building with big parking lots and greens and fountains and computers and gyms and you name it. Can you imagine the pain his friend would feel every time he drove past his friend's brand new building and then drove past this shell of a building that he never completed? The beautiful building in our story is the Beit HaMikdash, is the Holy Temple. It was built by Shlomo HaMelech, alav shalom, the first one. And it was full of business transactions. Full of business transactions. What were the business transactions? The avodah, the service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that took place there. The whole purpose of the magnificent structure was for people to come and do their business transactions there. In other words, to come and serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This was a place that they would come and serve him. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Shlomo HaMelech, alav shalom, is that you, the wisest of all men, are in the process of building a building. It will not survive if it is empty. It is, of course, an instruction for King Solomon to make sure that the people follow in the path of the Torah. But it is much more, something more than that we have to learn, not just for the leaders. Shlomo HaMelech could instruct us to do something. We don't have to listen. We have to learn that we have to ensure that God's word is followed completely. Because God is not going to say, okay, my sons and daughters, I'm going to build you a building, and what's going to happen in there? Nothing. No business. When I see that you're doing enough business, when I see that we really need a place of our own, a building to continue the transactions, meaning the service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a daily basis, then I'm going to build it for you. And that is where we're holding right now. And as we know, one of the big areas, not just that we've forgotten the Beit HaMikdash, you have to understand, the Beit HaMikdash is bigger than we think. Not in terms of size, but in terms of what it means to us. The suffering, the pain that is going on in our lives. Everybody is suffering. Nowadays, there's more suffering, I think, than there were in previous years. Every few, weeks, months, you hear about somebody critically ill, God forbid, young people dying before their time. It's a weird world. People are living much longer than ever and then dying younger than ever. I don't know what's going on. People have other kinds of suffering, all kinds of things going on in the world today. If we had the Beit HaMikdash, there wouldn't be any of it. We turn around and say, what's happening? What's happening? Let's pray harder for the Beit HaMikdash. We know one of the big things in an area that we're all stumbling in, of course, is Lashon Hara, inappropriate words, how we deal with each other. That was the second Beit HaMikdash. That was not the Beit HaMikdash of Shlomo HaMelech, alav shalom, but the second one, we know went for that. How particular are we? How particular are we about that? I'm going to change the order in which I wanted to say things to you, and I have a reason for it. I was going to leave some of this for later, but let me deal with it now. It says in Sawarei Shalal, going on what I asked a little while ago, En la menahem. There is no comfort. What does it mean there is no comfort? That's what we're trying to figure out. There is no comfort. Does it mean what it sounds like, that there's no third Beit HaMikdash going to come? Yerushalayim is not going to be rebuilt. Has v'shalom. Was Rabbeinu the Hida wrong when he told the women, go back and clean your houses and paint them twice on Tisha B'Av? It says in Yeshaya, Habitu el Abraham abichem. Look at your father Abraham. Will Sarah tehole lechem, and to Sarah Emenu, who gave birth to you. Ki ehad kirathiu, because I called him when he was one. Wa'barachehu ve'arbehu, and I will bless him and I will make him multiply, increase him. So, it says in Sawarei Shalal, quoting the Gaon Rabbi Aharon ben Hayim, based on the Midrash, that any place where you see that it says En la, she doesn't have, Yesh la, she does have. That sounds shocking. If it says En la, she doesn't have, it actually means Yesh la, she does have. For instance, it says in the Torah, Watehi Sarai Akara, speaking about Sarai Menu Alei Shalom, she was barren. En la walad. She doesn't have a child. And what does it say? Washem pakadet Sarah. And God remembered Sarah. So the Torah is saying she doesn't have a child, and now she does have a child. Of course she had a child. Yitzhak Abinu alav shalom. About Zion, it says in Yirmiyah, Doresh en la. There's nobody asking for her. En la, nobody, nothing, isn't. She doesn't have. And then what does it say in Yeshaya? Uba leSiyon goel. A redeemer will come to Zion. First we say she doesn't have, now we say the Redeemer is coming to her. In Midrash Eicha, it says, Bachot tibkei balayla v'dim'atha. She weeps bitterly in the night. Al lihya, en la menahem mikol ohabeha. Among all those who love her, she has no one to comfort her. En la, no one to comfort her. That's what's troubling us. But in the future, Yeshayahu Nabi tells us, Anochi, 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 hu menahem achem. God is saying, I am the one who is going to comfort you. Wherever we have en la, that there isn't, she won't have, yesh la. So when we read in Eicha that there is no comfort for Zion, HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself is saying, I am the one who is going to come and comfort Zion. So the heartbreak that we feel when we read these Pesukim, we must know what it's saying is, look at your father Abraham Avinu, look at your mother Sarah Imenu. Why? Because we said that they're Akara, and there's a question. It says that Sarah was Akara en la walad. If she's barren, do you need to tell me she doesn't have kids? It's duplication. Why is the Torah duplicating when the Torah never duplicates anything? And the answer is, both Abraham Avinu and Sarah Imenu were unfit to have children. They could not have children. That's why it says it twice. That she's Akara and En lah walad, doesn't have a child. It's really referring to the fact that both of them were barren, yet look what happened. What happened? I blessed him and I made him numerous. So we, the Jewish people, have only the promises of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We don't have to worry about anything else. We're praying for that time to come soon when they tell us that the Yerushalayim will be all the sound of joy and melodies and everything else. In simple terms, when we talk about the last Beit HaMikdash that Haggai, the prophet, was talking about, there are a couple of explanations. Well, there's more than a couple, I'll give you two of them. A very simple explanation. When the prophet says that this is the second one, meaning the last one, he says, is going to be greater than the first, because the Gemara tells us it was greater than the first, it was bigger, it was this, it was that. But, and you could see it from much further away, but it doesn't mean when you say the last that there's going to be no more. Let's say you would walk into a used and new car dealer, and you would have in his lot this model car, but from different years. And you're trying to choose one, you're looking at the prices and the colors and everything. You would say to the dealer, this was from 10 years ago, this is 5, and which is the last one? You don't mean which is the last one, they're not going to make any more. You know they're going to make another one next year because they got to get your money again. They got to change the lights, they got to change the shape a little bit, just so you're going to spend more money. So when you say it's the last one, what do you mean by the last one? You mean it's the last one they made so far. So that is one explanation. But there's another explanation that I want to share with you, which I think is a very important one that the Holy Ben Ish Hai actually tells us. He says there was a king who was in the palace, but not in the throne room, the main room. He was sitting with 7 of his advisors, and they were sitting together and discussing matters of state. The king then says to his advisors, okay, I think it's time for us to go into the throne room, the state room, and I will sit on my throne, and whoever is the 7th person to walk into the state room today will have the honor of sitting next to me. He always had one of the advisors sitting next to him, and they took turns, sometimes this one, sometimes that one. He said, the 7th one, remember 7 advisors, the 7th one will sit next to me. So the king walks in, followed one by his advisors. The last advisor, who is now theoretically the 8th person, who walks into the room, makes himself comfortable and sits down next to the king. The one before him, who was the 7th person to walk in, he says, what do you think you're doing? He said, I'm sitting next to the king. He says, no, you have to be the 7th person. He said, I am. He said, no, I'm the 7th person. So the one who came in last said, excuse me, you're counting the king as one of us? His Majesty is on a different level. You can't include him with us. You can't include yourself with him. The king came in, and then 7 advisors came in. I am the 7th, and therefore I get to sit next to the king. The first 2 Batei Mikdash, the first 2 temples were built by man. There is a machloket about this, but we say that the 3rd one will be built by God. As we say, Mikedash Hashem konenu yadecha. That actually, I just want to say a little bit of grammar here. It's my opportunity to get it in. I'm only kidding. Mikedash. According to Sephardi pronunciation, we say Mikedash, not Mikdash. Why? Because the word is not Mikdash, meaning temple. It has a hizuk, a dagesh in the kof. Why? Because it actually means from the Holy One of God, which also means the temple. But that is why it's written the way it is. Normally, Mikdash, which means temple, does not have a hizuk, does not have a dagesh in the kof. In any case, it doesn't make any difference for our purposes here. What we're saying is, this final Beit HaMikdash will be established by the works of God's own hands. So the 3rd temple is not a man-made temple. So we've had our 2 temples. We had the first and we had the last. That's over. Now we're waiting for the big one. The big one, which is going to be built by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. It's going to come down according to this opinion from Shamayim. And according to everybody, this final 3rd Beit HaMikdash will never, ever be destroyed. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu built it, nobody's going to come and destroy it. Nobody's going to come and tameh it, make it tameh. So that is the other explanation for what the prophet Haggai is telling us.